I'll give you home. That's what a rich giant cowboy told a poor mother of twins in the middle of a dusty frontier town. Folks laughed, thinking he'd lost his senses. But the very next day, he did something no one expected. He started building her a cabin with his own hands. The church bell tolled. Dust swirled. And for a moment, it seemed like hope had finally come to a woman and her children who had nothing left. But just as the walls of her new life rose, a stranger rode, in with papers that could rip it all apart. Papers claiming her children didn't belong to her anymore. Now, with armed men circling in a jail cell waiting, one giant cowboy must decide if he'll risk everything, his land, his wealth, even his life for a promise spoken in front of the whole town. Will this poor mother lose the only family she has left, or will one man's vow change everything on the western frontier? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The train's shrill whistle pierced the crisp Colorado morning air, its iron wheels grinding against the tracks as it pulled into the depot. Wisps of steam curled upward, mingling with the dust that seemed to coat everything in this frontier town. The wooden platform creaked under the weight of waiting townspeople, their breaths visible in the raw spring air. Donald Boone stood apart from the crowd, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the weathered boards. Though he owned the largest cattle ranch for 50 miles, he kept to himself most days, finding more comfort in the company of his horses than in town gossip. The death of his wife 5 years ago had left him with an emptiness that even his vast holdings couldn't fill. The train hissed to a stop, and passengers began filtering out onto the platform. Donald watched without much interest until his eyes fell on a slight figure descending the steep steps. A woman, thin as a rail, her black dress faded but clean, helped two small children down beside her. Twins by the look of them, with matching copper-colored hair and wide, uncertain eyes. They clung to their mother's hands like sailors to a lifeline. The woman's face was drawn with exhaustion, yet she held herself with quiet dignity. Under one arm, she clutched a well-worn Bible, its leather covers softened by years of handling. Her children's shoes were more patched than leather, their clothes mended multiple times by careful hands. Sheriff Morton pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the morning light. "Papers?" he demanded, looking down at the woman. "I am Steele Mayfield, sir," she answered softly, but clearly. "These are my children." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Where are you coming from?" "Where's your husband?" "From Kansas, sir." "My husband?" "Her." Voice caught for just a moment. "He passed last winter. The drought took our farm." Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Donald noticed how the twins pressed closer to their mother, their small faces pinched with worry. "No money?" The sheriff pressed, though the answer was plain to see. "Just enough for the train fare, sir. But I'm strong and I can work. I'm seeking honest employment and a roof for my children." Steela's voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened on her children's hands. "Ain't got no kin here, neither." "I reckon," the sheriff continued, his tone growing harder. "This town's got enough troubles without taking in every widow and orphan that drops off the train." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, with several voices calling out in agreement. "Move along," someone shouted. "Try Denver," called another. Watched as Steela drew herself up straighter, though he could see the tremble in her shoulders. "Please," she said, her voice barely carrying over the platform noise. "We don't ask for charity, just a chance to prove our worth." The sheriff took a step forward, his hand moving to rest meaningfully on his belt. "Now listen here, I'll give you home." Donald's deep voice cut through the chatter like a knife through butter. He hadn't planned to speak, hadn't even known he was going to until the words were already out. The crowd fell silent and every head turned toward him. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. Standing closer now, he could see the hope warring with disbelief in Steela's eyes. The twins stared up at him, their small faces a mixture of fear and wonder at his towering height. "Mr. Boone," the sheriff started, "you can't be serious, I reckon." I am. Donald's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the quiet words. My ranch needs a housekeeper. Been meaning to hire one for some time now. Gasps and whispers erupted across the boardwalk. Donald Boone, the solitary rancher who barely spoke 2 words at church socials, offering his home to a strange widow. And her children? It was unheard of. Steela stood, frozen, her lips parted in shock. Sir, she managed finally, you don't know anything about us. I know you're willing to work, he replied simply. I know those children need a roof over their heads. That's enough for now. The twins looked up at their mother, then back at Donald, their identical faces showing matching expressions of cautious hope. The boy's grip on his sister's hand tightened. Crowd pressed closer, drinking in every word of this unexpected drama. Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, pushed forward. Donald Boone, have you lost your senses? A single man taking in a widow and her children? What will people say? They'll say what they please, Donald answered, his calm gaze never leaving Steela's face. They always do. Steela swallowed hard, straightening her thin shoulders. Mr. Boone, your offer is more than generous, but I must ask, would my children be safe? Would they be allowed to stay with me? The question seemed to surprise him, but his response came without hesitation. Ma'am, I've got room enough for a family. Your children will have a proper bed, 3 meals a day, and schooling when the term starts. Do you have my word on that? The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and something in Steela's face softened. She looked down at her children, who were watching the exchange with solemn eyes. What do you think, little ones? Should we accept Mr. Boone's kind offer? The twins exchanged a quick glance, seeming to communicate without words as only twins. The girl nodded first, followed quickly by her brother. If you're certain, Steela said, turning back to Donald, then we accept with gratitude. The crowd erupted in fresh murmurs, and the sheriff threw up his hands in exasperation. On your head be it, Boone, he muttered, turning away. Donald stepped forward and reached for the small carpetbag at Steela's feet, all the worldly possessions this little family had to their name. My wagon's this way, he said quietly. It's a fair piece to the ranch, but we'll have you settled before sundown. As he led them toward his waiting wagon, the whispers followed them like autumn leaves in the wind. Steela walked with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly where they gripped her children's. The twins stayed close to their mother, sneaking glances up at the giant of a man who had just changed their lives with 4 simple words. The morning sun broke through. The clouds as they reached Donald's wagon, casting long shadows across the dusty street. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as he helped Steela and the twins up onto the wooden seat. Handling them as carefully as if they were made of china, Donald climbed up last, taking the reins in his strong hands. As he did so, Steela sat, very straight beside him, her Bible clutched tightly in her lap, her children pressed close on either side. She stared ahead at the road leading out of town, her expression a complex mixture of fear, hope, and determination. The wagon wheels creaked. As they began to roll away from the depot, leaving behind a wake of wagging tongues and wide eyes, none of them could quite believe what they had just witnessed, least of all Steela herself, who kept glancing at the massive, quiet man beside her, as if expecting him to change his mind at any moment. But Donald Boone's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, his presence solid and reassuring as a mountain. He had made his choice, and whatever tomorrow might bring, there would be no turning back now. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as Donald guided his team along the dusty trail leading out of town. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the spring air and casting long shadows through the wind-bent pines that dotted the landscape. Steela sat straight-backed beside him, her twins pressed close against her sides, their eyes wide as they watched. The town shrank behind them. Mile after mile passed beneath the wagon wheels. They crossed shallow creek beds and skirted rocky outcrops, the mountains looming ever closer. Cattle trails crisscrossed their path, marking the vastness of Boone Ranch's grazing lands. The twins pointed excitedly when they spotted a herd in the distant dark shapes moving against the golden grass. Your land goes far as we can see? Steela asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence. Donald nodded, most of it. Been in my family 3 generations now. He clicked softly to the horses as they began climbing a gentle rise. Ranch house is just over this hill. As they crested the rise, Steela caught her breath. Sprawling against the mountain backdrop was Boone Ranch, a large main house of solid timber, a sturdy barn, corral, and various outbuildings. Several cowboys were visible in the yard, going about their morning tasks. It's like a small town. One of the twins whispered in awe. Donald guided the wagon into the yard, where a lean, weathered man approached them. "Hank," Donald called out. "Come meet our new housekeeper and her children." Hank Miller touched the brim of his hat, his eyes kind beneath his sun-creased face. He said simply. "Welcome to Boone Ranch." The other ranch hands gathered at a respectful distance, curiosity playing on their faces. Donald helped Steela and the twins down from the wagon, then turned to address his men. "Mrs. Mayfield and her children will be staying with us," he announced, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "They'll need their own cabin. We start building today." The men exchanged glances, but nodded. They knew their boss well enough to understand this wasn't up for discussion. Hank was already moving toward the tool shed. "I'll gather the hammers and saw, boss. Much obliged, Hank." Donald turned to Steela. "For now, you can use the summer kitchen behind the main house. Everything you need should be there." Steela nodded, clutching her Bible close. "I'll have a hot meal ready for the men by noon." Within the hour, the yard was alive with activity. Donald had shed his coat and rolled up his sleeves, working alongside his men to mark out the cabin's foundation. The sound of hammers rang out as they began raising the frame, each blow bringing Steela's new home closer to reality. The twins proved eager to help, scampering back and forth with nails and water buckets. Their mother had found her place at the summer kitchen's stone hearth, where a large kettle of beans simmered over the fire. The aroma drifted across the yard, mixing with the sharp scent of fresh-cut pine. "Your boss is something else. One of..." The younger ranch hands muttered to Hank as they fitted a ceiling beam into place. Hank nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Man knows what's right and does it. Simple as that." The sun tracked across the sky as the cabin took shape. Donald worked tirelessly, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he guided each beam into place. Whenever Steela glanced his way, she found it hard to believe this was the same man who had spoken those life-changing words at the train station just yesterday. As evening approached, the cabin's basic frame stood complete, a simple structure, but solid. Donald wiped sweat from his brow and surveyed their work with satisfaction. "We'll add the walls tomorrow," he said. "Roof by week's end." Steela approached him hesitantly, her hands twisted in her apron. "Mr. Boone," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you for all this." Donald shook his head. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Mayfield. Every soul deserves a roof over their head. That's all there is to it." The ranch hands began cleaning up for the day, storing tools and gathering scattered nails. The twins helped until they could barely keep their eyes open, their small faces smudged with dirt, but glowing with pride in their contribution. "They can sleep in the bunkhouse tonight," Hank offered, seeing their exhaustion. "Got some spare blankets stored away." Donald nodded. "And Mrs. Mayfield can take the guest room in the main house." But Steela shook her head firmly. "I'll stay with my children, if you don't mind. We've never spent a night apart." "The bunkhouse it is, then," Donald agreed, respect evident in his tone as darkness settled over the ranch. Steela sat on a wooden chair in the bunkhouse, a small oil lamp casting a warm glow. Her twins lay curled together on a nest of blankets, their breathing deep and even. Several ranch hands snored softly in their bunks, while others played cards quietly at the far end of the room. Steela's fingers traced the worn cover of her Bible, her mind whirling with the events of the past 2 days. The terrible uncertainty at the train station seemed like a distant dream now, replaced by something she scarcely dared to trust, hope. Through the window, she could see the dark shape of her future home silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The man who had made it possible was out there somewhere, probably checking his herds one last time before turning in. Donald Boone was unlike anyone she had ever met, a man whose actions spoke far louder than his quiet words. The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. Steela's eyes grew heavy, but she fought sleep, wanting to hold on to this moment a little longer. If this was a dream, she wasn't ready to wake up just yet. Morning light spilled across Boone Ranch, painting the mountain peaks gold. The sharp rhythm of hammers rang out across the yard as Donald and his men resumed work on Steela's cabin. The fresh-cut pine boards gave off a sweet scent in the warming air. Mixing with the morning coffee brewing over the cook fire, Steela emerged. From the bunkhouse, her hair neatly braided despite the early hour. She had already prepared breakfast for the ranch hands, thick slices of bread with gravy and eggs from the hen house. The twins bounded out behind her, their faces scrubbed clean, and clothes straightened as best she could manage. "Ma, can we help again?" the boy asked eagerly. "After your breakfast," Steela replied, smoothing his tousled hair. She caught Donald watching them from where he stood measuring boards, a ghost of a smile touching his usually stern face. The morning progressed steadily as wall after wall rose toward the bright Colorado sky. Steela proved herself useful, holding boards steady, while Donald and Hank drove nails home with practice swings. Her slim arms trembled sometimes with the effort, but she never complained. "You've got a good eye for straight lines, Mrs. Mayfield," Hank commented as they fitted another board into place. "My father was a carpenter," she explained softly. "I used to help him when I was young." The twins had discovered the chicken coop where they delighted in tossing feed and watching the hens scratch and peck. Their laughter rang out pure and clear across the yard, a sound that had been rare in recent weeks of hardship. Several ranch hands paused in their work to grin at the children's antics. As the sun climbed toward noon, Donald paused to wipe sweat from his brow. He leaned against a completed wall, watching Steela guide a nail into place with careful precision. "Reminds me of building my own place," he said quietly. "Years back, after Sarah, my wife, passed." He fell silent for a moment, his eyes distant. "Threw myself into the work then. Kept hammering long after dark some nights, trying not to hear how quiet the house had gotten." Steela looked up at him, understanding in her eyes. "Grief finds us in the silence," she said softly. Donald nodded, then straightened and reached for another board. But something in his bearing had shifted, as if sharing that small piece of his past had lightened a burden he'd carried too long. By midday, the cabin walls stood tall and proud. Steela had been given permission to use Donald's kitchen to prepare the noon meal, a far cry from the meager provisions she'd been able to afford in recent months. She moved through the spacious room with reverence, handling the well-made cookware and abundant ingredients like treasures. The stew she prepared filled the house with rich aromas, beef, potatoes, and herbs from the kitchen garden. When the ranch hands filed in for dinner, their appreciative murmurs brought color to her cheeks. "Ain't had cooking like this since my mama's table," one old cowboy declared, reaching for seconds. The twins sat between Hank and Donald at the long table, their eyes wide at the abundance before them. When everyone was served, Steela bowed her head. "Shall we give thanks?" she asked quietly. Donald started slightly, then nodded. The room fell silent as Steela's clear voice rose in prayer. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for the kindness of strangers. Become friends, for walls to shelter us and work to occupy our hands. Bless this home and all who dwell here. Amen." "Amen," the twins echoed promptly. Donald's hands were clasped tightly before him, his eyes fixed on them as if they belonged to someone else. How long had it been since prayer had been spoken in his home? The memory of Sarah's voice offering grace rose unbidden in his mind. The afternoon brought more progress as the men began preparing heavy roof timbers. Donald's massive strength proved invaluable as he hefted beams that would have taken two normal men to lift. The twins had settled on an old log near the building site, watching the work with fascination. "Uncle Doan is strong as a bear," the boy exclaimed as Donald shouldered another massive beam. "Stronger," his sister agreed, clapping her hands. Uncle Doan, can you lift that big one next? Donald nearly dropped the timber he was carrying. He stared at the children, something raw and vulnerable flashing across his weathered face. The ranch hands held their breath, unsure how their boss would react to such familiarity, but Donald simply adjusted his grip on the beam and moved forward. Though his eyes had gained a suspicious sheen, he didn't correct the children's choice of name. From where she stood in the doorway of the main house, Stila watched the scene unfold. She saw the way Donald's shoulders had tensed at first, then gradually relaxed as the twins continued their innocent chatter. Something was changing in the big rancher, a softening around his eyes, a gentleness in his movements despite his impressive strength. The twins had begun gathering small stones to mark the outline of a garden they hoped to plant, chattering about vegetables and flowers. Each time they discovered a particularly nice rock, they would run to show Uncle Doan, who would solemnly examine it and pronounce it perfect for their purpose. As evening approached, the roof beams were all in place, ready for the next day's work. The cabin was taking shape rapidly, transforming from dream to reality under the skilled hands of Donald and his men. But perhaps an even more remarkable transformation was happening in the heart of the lonely rancher himself, one small moment at a time. The twins had fallen asleep on their log, leaning against each other in the last rays of sunset. Donald carefully lifted them both, one in each massive arm, and carried them toward the bunkhouse. Their small heads rested trustingly against his shoulders as he moved with surprising gentleness for such a large man. "Look there," Hank murmured, to Stila, nodding toward his boss. "Ain't seen him look that peaceful since before Sarah passed." Stila watched Donald disappear into the bunkhouse with his precious burden, her heart full of gratitude and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. The Lord truly did work in mysterious ways, she thought, bringing healing to wounded hearts through the simple faith of children. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, bright and clear in the mountain air. Another day of hard work and small miracles had drawn to a close on Boone Ranch, leaving its mark on all who dwelled there. A week passed like a dream at Boone Ranch. The spring air carried the scent of pine and promise as the cabin took its final shape under skilled hands and determined hearts. The morning sun found Stila kneeling by the new wooden steps, carefully setting wildflower seedlings into the rich mountain soil. Her hands, though tired from days of work, moved with gentle purpose as she tucked each delicate plant into place. "These'll bloom bright come summer," she murmured, patting the earth around a cluster of columbine starts. The twins had helped her gather them from a sunny meadow the day before, their pockets stuffed with the precious roots wrapped in damp cloth. Above her, the steady rhythm of hammers marked where Donald and his men set the final cedar shingles into place. The roof was nearly done, its fresh wood gleaming golden in the morning light. The cabin stood proud and sturdy, a testament to what willing hands could build in just a week's time. Donald's heavy boots creaked on the new planks as he descended the ladder. He disappeared into his barn for a moment, then emerged carrying something covered with a rough blanket. Stila stood, brushing dirt from her skirts as he approached. "Got something for you," he said, his deep voice holding an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. He pulled away the blanket to reveal a small table, crafted from pine boards. The surface was somewhat rough, the legs a bit uneven, but it had been made with obvious care. "I ain't much for fine woodworking," Donald admitted, running a calloused hand along the edge, "but reckon every home needs a table to gather round." Stila's eyes filled with tears as she touched the simple piece of furniture. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." A hint of color touched Donald's weathered cheeks. Before he could respond, the thunder of hoofbeats drew their attention to the road. A sleek bay horse approached, its rider sitting straight and proper in an eastern cut suit that looked out of place against the ranch's rugged backdrop. The twins, who had been playing with a stick horse near the chicken coop, scampered to their mother's side. Something in the stranger's bearing made them huddle close to her skirts. The rider reined his horse to a stop, dust settling around its polished hooves. His thin face wore an expression of practiced authority as he surveyed the scene before him. "I'm looking for Mrs. Stella Mayfield," he announced, his voice carrying the clipped tones of formal education. "I'm Mrs. Mayfield," Stella answered, one hand resting protectively on each child's shoulder. The man dismounted with fluid grace, pulling a leather document case from his saddlebag. "I am Mr. Wilkes, representing the First Bank of Denver." He withdrew several papers, holding them with precise fingers. "I have here legal documents regarding the outstanding debts of your late husband, Jonathan Mayfield." Tila's face went pale. "Debts? But, Jonathan," she faltered. Wilkes continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "The sum owed, with interest, amounts to $842. As you obviously lack means to pay this amount," his eyes swept dismissively over her patched dress. "The law provides alternative methods of settlement." He held out one of the papers. Donald stepped forward and took it, his large hands making the document seem small as he read carefully. The muscles in his jaw tightened with each line. "According to territorial statute," Wilkes went on, "minor children may be bound into indentured service to satisfy parental debts. Your twins will be placed with appropriate households until they reach majority age, or the debt is discharged. Whichever comes first." "No." Stella's cry tore from her throat as she pulled the children tight against her. "You can't take my babies." The twins began to whimper, not understanding everything but knowing their mother's fear. Donald's hands tightened on the paper until his knuckles showed white. "This here's fraud," he said, voice low and dangerous as a mountain storm. With deliberate motion, he tore the document in half, then in quarters. "These children ain't property to be seized. They're under my protection now, and no one will take them while I draw breath." Wilkes's face hardened. "Destroying legal documents won't change the law, Mr. Boone. This matter will go before the county judge. I suggest you consider carefully whether you wish to involve yourself in another family's unfortunate situation." "Ain't nothing to consider," Donald growled. "This is their home now. Home means safe." The banker's agent mounted his horse with the same precise grace he'd shown in dismounting. "We shall see what the court has to say about that. Good day." He touched his hat brim with mocking politeness and turned his horse toward town. They watched him ride away, dust rising behind him like a shadow of threat. Stella's shoulders shook as she held her children, who clung to her in confused fear. "Hush now," Donald said softly, his voice gentler than any had heard it before. "No one's taking these young uns anywhere." "But the law," Stella began. "Laws? One thing. Justice is another." Donald's eyes held steady on hers. "And I aim to see justice done." The twins, sensing the tension ease slightly, began to wiggle free of their mother's grip. Their resilient young spirits soon had them back at play, their laughter drifting across the yard as they resumed their game with the stick horse. Stella watched them, her face still pale but her spine straight. "I won't let them be taken," she whispered. "I'd run to the ends of the earth first." Donald laid his big hand gently on her shoulder. "No need for running. You got friends now. Family, even." He glanced at the torn papers scattered in the dust. Besides, something ain't right about those documents. Man like that, showing up out of nowhere with claims on children. "No, we'll get to the bottom of this." They stood in tense silence, watching the twins play. The new cabin rose behind them, solid and strong, its fresh-cut wood still fragrant in the spring air. The wildflowers Stella had planted trembled in the breeze, their tender roots already seeking hold in this new soil. "Home means safe," Donald had said. Standing beside him, feeling the quiet strength of his presence, Stella prayed it would prove true. For now, they could only wait, watching their children laugh in the sunshine, holding fast to hope while storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The morning's joy had been shadowed, but not destroyed. As if to prove it, one of the twins called out, "Uncle Doan, come see what we found." Their innocent voices carried across the yard, untouched by adult fears and troubles. Donald squared his shoulders, gave Stella one more reassuring look, and strode toward the children. His massive frame cast a protective shadow as he knelt beside them, examining whatever treasure they discovered with the same serious attention he'd given to their garden stones days before. Stila watched them, her heart full of both fear and gratitude. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That thought gave her strength enough to lift her chin and turn back to her planting. The wildflowers still needed tending, and she had learned long ago that honest work was the best medicine for a troubled spirit. The morning sun cast long shadows across Boone Ranch as Donald saddled his bay horse. Stila stood near the corral, a basket of eggs tucked against her hip, watching as he tightened the cinch with practiced hands. "I'll speak with the county clerk," he said, his deep voice steady despite the worry creasing his brow. "See what's behind these so-called debts." "Be careful," Stila replied softly. "Men like Wilkes, they have friends in high places." Donald nodded, swinging into the saddle with fluid grace despite his size. "Truth got power of its own, ma'am. We just got to bring it to light." The twins burst from the cabin, waving wildly. "Bye, Uncle Don," they called in chorus. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face as he touched his hat brim and turned his horse toward town. The day stretched long at the ranch. Stila threw herself into work, finding comfort in the rhythm of honest labor. She hung fresh laundry. On the line, the white sheets snapping in the spring breeze. Her skilled fingers darned holes in the twin stockings as they sat at her feet, sounding out words from her treasured Bible. And the Lord said, her daughter struggled with the verse. "Sound. It's slow," Stila encouraged, "like we practiced." In the kitchen, she kneaded bread dough with strong, sure movements. The familiar task reminded her of happier days before Jonathan's passing. But now, watching her children's faces glow in the afternoon light, she felt hope taking root alongside. Her grief got Hank, the foreman, stopped by to check on them. "Miss Stila," he said, removing his hat, "that stew you made yesterday was mighty fine." The boys were wondering if... She smiled, already reaching for her apron. "I'll have supper ready for the bunkhouse by sundown." The ranch hands had been skeptical at first, but her cooking had won them over. Soon the kitchen filled with the rich aroma of beef stew, thick with vegetables from the winter cellar. The twins helped by peeling potatoes, their small faces serious. With concentration, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, hoofbeats announced Donald's return. Stila's heart sank when she saw his expression. He dismounted slowly, like a man carrying a heavy burden. "The judge," he said without preamble, once they stood alone by the corral. "He's deep in the bank's pocket, been signing whatever papers they put before him these past 2 years." Stila's hands twisted in her apron. "Then Wilkes can. He's got the law on his side, corrupt as it is." Donald's jaw tightened. "But that don't make it right. And it don't mean we're beat. What can we do? Fight?" The word came firm and clear. "I have sent telegrams to lawyers in Denver. Meanwhile, we'll need witnesses, folks who knew Jonathan, who can speak to his character. And we'll need proof these debts are false. I have all Jonathan's papers," Stila offered. "Not many, but every scrap helps. We'll go through them together." He paused, looking toward the cabin where the twins. "Plabe, I gave my word, Mrs. Mayfield. Your children are safe here. That ain't changed." At supper, the twins chattered happily, unaware of the adults' concerns. "I helped feed the chickens," her son announced proudly. "The speckled hen pecked my boot. And I saw new calves," his sister added. 3 of them, all wobbly-legged. Donald listened gravely to their tailies, offering occasional nods of approval. Stila watched him with her children, saw how naturally they turned to him, how carefully he considered their words. This giant of a man who could break a wild horse or face down a banker showed infinite patience with their simple stories. After the dishes were cleared and the twins tucked into bed, Donald walked out into the starlit night. From her cabin window, Stila could see his tall figure moving slowly along the fence line. He stopped at the far corner, where the land dropped away toward the valley dot in the silver moonlight. She watched him remove his hat. His head bowed, and though she couldn't Hear his words, she knew he was praying. Tears filled her eyes at the sight of this strong man humbling himself before God, seeking guidance in the quiet darkness. Her own prayers rose to join his, whispered into the night air, for her children's safety, for strength to face whatever came, for this good man who had opened his home and his heart to strangers in need. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely song echoing off the mountains. Donald stood a while longer, silent under the vast sky. When he finally turned back toward the ranch buildings, his steps were steady, purposeful. Whatever battles lay ahead, he had found his resolve in that solitary communion. Stella stepped away from her window, feeling strangely comforted. She checked on her sleeping twins, their peaceful faces untroubled by adult fears. In the quiet cabin, she took out Jonathan's old Bible and opened it to the Psalms, reading by lamplight until her own fears subsided into determined faith. The next day would bring its own challenges, but for now, the ranch slept under bright stars. In 2 households, one large and one small, hearts beat with shared purpose and growing strength. The fight ahead would not be easy, but they would face it together. Armed with truth and unwavering conviction got through her open window, Stella heard Donald's bootsteps fade as he retired to his own house. The night settled around them, peaceful. Despite the troubles gathering like storm clouds on their horizon, she blew out her lamp and lay down, letting the familiar sounds of the ranch, crickets chirping, cattle lowing softly in the distance, the gentle rustle of wind in the pines, lull her towards sleep. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in soft rose and gold as smoke curled from the chimney of Stella's cabin. Inside, she worked quickly, her hands dusted with flour as she shaped biscuits for the morning meal. The familiar motions brought comfort, cutting cold lard into flour, adding just enough buttermilk, patting the dough with practiced care. Through the window, she watched her twins trudging toward the chicken coop, wooden feed buckets swinging from their small hands. Their voices carried on the morning air, mixing with the eager clucking of hungry hens. "Don't forget to check for eggs," she called after them. "Yes, Mama." They answered in unison. The ranch was coming alive around her. Boots scraped on wooden planks as cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse, and horses nickered in the corrals. Donald's tall figure moved among them, conferring with Hank about the day's work ahead. The twins burst back through the door, their cheeks pink with excitement. "Look, Mama, 8 eggs today." Her daughter held up the basket proudly while her son carefully arranged kindling in the stove. "Well done," Stella smiled, sliding the pan of biscuits into the oven. "Now wash up for breakfast." Over the next several days, a rhythm settled over the ranch. Each morning brought its own tasks, laundry strung between posts on Monday, bread baking on Tuesday, mending clothes on Wednesday. The twins fell easily into ranch life, learning to collect eggs without breaking them, to feed the chickens without waste, to carry water without spilling. The ranch hands, initially standoffish, began to warm to their presence. Old Pete, grizzled cook who'd fed the crew for 15 years, actually smiled when Stella offered to teach him her dumpling recipe. Young Travis, barely 20, blushed whenever she thanked him for carrying heavy water buckets to her door. "Ma'am," Hank said one afternoon, removing his hat as she passed. "That shirt you mended for me. Ain't never seen such fine stitching." "I'm glad to help," she replied, noting how the other men nodded in agreement. They'd begun bringing her their torn shirts and split seams, always offering to pay. Though she gently refused, Donald rode out each day with his men, checking fence lines and moving cattle across the vast property. Sometimes he'd return with wildflowers the twins had requested, or a rabbit for the stew pot. His quiet thoughtfulness revealed itself in small ways. A new rope for the water bucket, a sturdy footstool by the wash basin, a stack of kindling appeared each evening. When Saturday arrived, Donald hitched the wagon after breakfast. "Town's 10 miles, he announced. "Best get supplies while the weather holds." The twins clambered excitedly into the wagon bed, while Donald helped Stella onto the seat beside him. The spring morning was crisp, promising fair weather for their journey. As they rolled away from the ranch, Stella noticed how naturally the Twins had taken to calling out goodbye to each cowhand by name. The road into town wound through pine-covered hills and across shallow creeks. Donald handled the reins with casual expertise, pointing out landmarks to the fascinated children. An eagle's nest high in a dead pine, a fox den under tumbled rocks, the remains of an old stage station. "Look, Mama," her son called. "I can see the church steeple." The town appeared ahead, dusty buildings rising against the mountain backdrop. As they clattered down the main street, Stila felt the weight of stairs from the boardwalk. Some folks turned away, whispering behind raised hands. Others nodded respectfully to Donald, though their eyes slid past Stila as if she were invisible. "Ain't fitting," she heard one woman mutter. "Taking in strays like that. Burden on a good man." Another. "Agreed. But Mrs. Peterson," the minister's wife, smiled warmly. "Welcome back," she said, approaching the wagon. "We've missed you at services, Donald." "Been busy," he replied, helping Stila down from the seat, building the cabin and such. "Well, we'd love to see you all tomorrow," Mrs. Peterson said, including Stila and the twins in her invitation. "The children could join our Sunday school." Inside the general store, Stila moved carefully through the aisles, mentally calculating costs. She selected only necessities: flour, beans, salt. At the fabric counter, she fingered remnants in odd lengths, choosing sturdy cotton pieces that could be pieced into clothes for the growing twins. Donald added items to her careful selection: sugar, coffee, a bolt of cheerful calico, 2 penny candies that made the twins' eyes shine. When she started to protest, he shook his head. "Ranch needs supplies," he said simply. The proprietor's wife rang up their purchases, her expression. "Pinched? Will you be wanting credit, Mr. Boone?" "Cash," he answered, laying coins on the counter. Same as always. Loading their supplies into the wagon, they encountered Tom Wilkes emerging from the bank. His cold eyes swept over their group, lingering. On the twins, Donald stepped slightly forward, one hand resting near his gun belt. After a tense moment, Wilkes continued down the boardwalk. The sun was setting as they started home, painting the mountains in purple shadows. The steady clip-clop of hooves and gentle sway of the wagon soon lulled the twins to sleep. They slumped against Donald's broad shoulders, their faces peaceful in the gathering dusk. Stila watched him adjust his arm to better support their weight, noted how carefully he guided the team around rough spots to avoid jostling them. "Yes." Giant of a man who could break wild horses and face down bankers, showed such tenderness with her children. The moon rose, silvering the landscape as they rolled homeward. Stila felt the last walls around her heart beginning to crumble. She'd been so afraid to trust, to accept help, to believe in kindness again after Jonathan's death. But watching Donald with her twins, seeing his quiet strength and gentle ways, she felt profound gratitude replace her wariness. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for the day's purchases, but for everything. The cabin, the protection, the chance to build a new life." Donald nodded, understanding in his silence. The wagon rolled on through the moonlit night, carrying its precious cargo toward home. Behind them, the town's gossip and judgment faded like morning mist, while ahead, the ranch waited, solid and welcoming in the darkness. Sunday dawned clear. And bright over Boone Ranch, Stila smoothed her best dress, a faded blue cotton she'd carefully pressed the night before. The twins, scrubbed pink and wearing their mended clothes, fidgeted as she combed their hair. "Stand still now," she murmured, tying her daughter's ribbon. "We want to look proper for church." Outside, wagon wheels crunched on gravel as Donald brought the team around. He wore a clean black coat, his boots polished to a shine. When Stila emerged with the twins, he offered his hand to help them up to the seat, his manner grave and courteous. "Been a while since this wagon headed to worship," he said quietly. Glancing at the empty seat where his wife once sat, the 10-mile journey passed peacefully. Morning sun warmed the spring air as they rolled past greening meadows. The twins pointed at meadowlarks darting through new grass, while Stila held tight to her worn Bible. The whitewashed church rose before them, its small steeple reaching toward blue sky. Already, buggies and wagons clustered in the yard. As Donald helped Steela down, she felt the weight of stairs from families gathering on the steps. The wooden steps creaked under their feet. Steela's heart pounded as Donald opened the door, but she lifted her chin and guided the twins inside. The familiar scent of beeswax and hymn books wrapped around them. Floorboards groaned. Pews squeaked as heads turned. The twins pressed closer to her skirts. For a moment, the silence felt heavy as mountain snow dot. Then Donald's deep voice broke the quiet. "Morning, folks." He gestured to an empty pew near the middle, standing aside as Steela and the children slipped in. Without hesitation, he settled beside them, his broad shoulders straight, his expression calm. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Peterson smiled warmly from across the aisle. Even the banker's wife stopped whispering behind her fan. The organ wheezed to life as Reverend Peterson stepped to the pulpit. Sunlight streamed through plain-glass windows, catching dust motes and golden beams. The twins sat remarkably still, eyes wide at the colored Bible pictures hanging on the walls. Today, the preacher began opening his Bible. We turned to the book of James, chapter 1, verse 27. His clear voice carried to the rafters. Pure religion and undefiled before. God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. Steela felt tears prick her eyes. Beside her, Donald shifted slightly, his arm brushing hers in silent support. The sermon flowed like clear water, speaking of duty to those in need, of Christ's love shown through actions, not merely words. When Reverend Peterson described how true faith meant standing beside the vulnerable, several heads turned toward Donald's pew as the final prayer ended. Mrs. Peterson approached the organ. "Before we close," she said, "I wonder if our new friend might favor us with a hymn. I hear tell Mrs. Mayfield has quite a voice." Steela's throat tightened. She hadn't sung in public since Jonathan's funeral. But the twins squeezed her hands, and Donald nodded encouragement. Standing slowly, she made her way to the front. The organ's introduction filled the small church as she closed her eyes, remembering Jonathan's favorite hymn. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Her voice trembled at first, then grew stronger, lifting clear and true to the rough-hewn beams above. The congregation sat motionless as she sang, her heart pouring into each familiar word. When she opened her eyes, she saw Donald staring straight ahead, one hand pressed to his chest. A tear tracked down his weathered cheek after the final Amen. Neighbors crowded around their pew. Old Mr. Jenkins pumped Donald's hand. "Fine thing you've done, Boone," he said gruffly, taking in those young'uns. "Shows real Christian spirit." "The Lord's work, plain and simple," added his wife, patting Steela's arm. Even the banker's wife managed a tight smile as she passed. The twins found quick friends among the Sunday school children, trading stories about pets and ponies. "You'll come again next week?" Mrs. Peterson asked hopefully. The children's class is studying Noah's Ark. Outside, spring sunshine warmed the churchyard as families lingered, talking. Donald loaded a basket into their wagon. Mrs. Jenkins' chicken pie, Mrs. Peterson's apple tart, tokens of welcome from women who'd whispered behind fans just hours before. The ride home felt lighter somehow. The twins chattered about their new friends, while Donald spoke more than usual. Describing past church suppers and barn raisings, back at the ranch the hands were finishing afternoon chores. Young Travis had swept the cabin steps, while old Pete stirred a pot of beans that smelled of ham and molasses. "Thought you folks might be hungry after all that praying," Pete said with a wink at the twins. They gathered around the long table in the cookhouse, ranch hands, children, widow, and rancher, passing plates and swapping stories. The twins demonstrated their Sunday school lessons, complete with animal sounds from Noah's Ark that set everyone laughing. Lamplight grew golden as evening settled in. Through the windows, purple shadows crept across the yard. The twins helped clear dishes, proud to be useful, while Steela served up Mrs. Peterson's apple tart. Donald sat at the head of the table, watching his expanded family with quiet satisfaction. When Hank started a tale about a stubborn mule, the twins climbed into empty chairs next to Uncle Doan, their eyes bright with excitement. Steele caught Donald's gaze across the table. The hardness that usually shadowed his eyes had softened, replaced by something warmer. She recognized it from her own heart, the healing that comes when loneliness gives way to belonging as darkness gathered outside. Laughter and lamplight filled the cookhouse. Stories flowed like water, sweet and necessary. The twins' heads began to nod, but they fought sleep, not wanting the evening to end. Pete threw another log in the stove. Travis dealt cards for a friendly game. Through the open door came night sounds, crickets, distant coyotes, the peaceful shifting of horses in the barn. Inside, the light gleamed on satisfied faces, on hands reaching for coffee cups, on a family that had found each other against all odds. Dark clouds gathered over Boone Ranch as the week began. Spring storms rolled across the valley, turning the yard to mud and keeping the cattle huddled against windbreaks. The steady drum of rain on the cabin's new roof made Steele grateful for solid walls and dry floors. Inside their snug home, she guided her daughter's small hands as they stitched bright cotton curtains. That's right, honey. Small and even just like that. Her son sat cross-legged by the hearth, carefully threading. Needles when asked. The twins had grown livelier since coming to the ranch, their faces fuller, their eyes bright with security. The thought made Steele's heart both warm and anxious. Donald occupied the room's lone rocking chair, his big hands working at worn leather reins with skilled patience. The fire's glow caught the silver threading through his dark hair as he worked, checking each stitch with careful eyes. A pile of mended tack grew beside him, headstalls, breast collars, and reins ready for clear weather. Mama, look. Her daughter held up the curtain panel, beaming with pride at the mostly straight seam. Is it good enough for our window? It's perfect, darling. Steele smoothed the fabric. These windows have waited a long time for such pretty. Dressing. Donald glanced up, a rare smile touching his eyes. Place needs a woman's touch, he said quietly. Been too long without one. Thunder rolled in the distance as they worked in comfortable quiet. The twins hummed hymns from Sunday service while Steele shaped bread dough on the small table Donald had built. The cabin filled with the warm scent of baking, mixing with leather and wood smoke. Storm's getting closer, Donald observed, testing. A repaired buckle? Glad the cattle are. A sharp knock cut through the peaceful scene. The twins startled, needle and thread forgotten. Donald rose slowly, setting aside his work. Through the window, Steele glimpsed horses in the yard. 3. Riders, their coats dark with rain. Her heart clenched as Donald opened the door. Wilkes stood on the step, water dripping from his hat brim. Behind him waited 2 deputies, their badges catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Mr. Boone? Wilkes' voice carried the smug satisfaction of a cat cornering mice. Mrs. Mayfield, I trust you're well. The twins pressed against Steele's skirts as she stood, arms protective around their shoulders. Donald remained in the doorway, his broad frame blocking most of the entrance. State your business, he said flatly. Wilkes pulled a folded paper from his coat. I bring notice from Judge Harrison regarding the matter of debt settlement for the late Jonathan Mayfield's estate. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. The court has ruled in the bank's favor. The minor children are to be delivered into custody for contracted labor until such time as the debt is satisfied. No, the word tore from Steele's throat. Please no. The law is clear, Mrs. Mayfield. Wilkes held out the paper. These deputies will escort the children to their new situation. I suggest you make it easier on everyone and cooperate. Donald's hands clenched into fists at his sides. That paper's worth less than horse manure, he growled. You manufactured this debt. You're stealing children for profit. Careful, Boone. The first deputy stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark white. Wilkes' superior smile. The deputies' grim faces, Donald's granite stance in the doorway. The twins trembled against Steela, and she held them tighter, her mind racing in desperate circles. I won't let you take them. Donald's voice was deadly quiet. Get off my land. Wilkes sighed theatrically. I had hoped to avoid unpleasantness. Very well. He tucked the paper away. We'll return with sufficient force to execute the court's order. I suggest you reconsider your position before then, Mr. Boone. Defying a legal ruling could cost you. Dearly, the deputies backed their horses away, hands still near their weapons. Wilkes touched his hat brim in mock courtesy. Good day, Mrs. Mayfield. Children, prepare yourselves. We'll return soon. They rode away through the curtain of rain. Donald shut the door with careful restraint, though Steela could see the tension vibrating through his shoulders. Her legs gave way. She sank to her knees, clutching her children as tears spilled down her cheeks. The twins began to cry too, more frightened by her reaction than understanding the threat. Mama, her son's voice quavered. What does that bad man mean? Are they going to take us away? Her daughter's tears soaked Steela's sleeve. Hush now. Donald knelt beside them, his big hand gentle on Steela's shoulder. Nobody's taking you anywhere. But the judge, Steela could barely speak through her tears. The law. How can we fight the law? We'll find a way. Donald's voice was firm. You're not alone in this, Steela. I swore to give you home, and I mean to keep that promise. She looked up at him through wet lashes, seeing the iron determination in his face. This man who had opened his land and life to them now stood as their shield against the storm. The realization steadied her somewhat. What can we do? She whispered. First, we calm these little ones. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, carefully wiping the twins' tears. No need for crying when you've got family to stand with you. Family. The word echoed in Steela's heart as she watched Donald comfort her children. He was right. They weren't alone anymore. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the windows in their frames. The twins jumped, but Donald gathered them close. Just the Lord doing some furniture moving, he said, making them giggle despite their fears. Now, who's going to help me finish mending this bridle? And I smell bread about ready for the oven. Gradually, the children settled back to their tasks, though. They stayed closer to Donald than before. Steela rescued her bread and set it to cool, going through the motions mechanically while her mind raced. The storm grew fiercer outside, rain lashing the windows and wind moaning in the chimney. But inside the cabin, they drew together like a fortress against the gathering dark. Donald told stories of clever ranch horses while he worked, keeping the twins entertained. Steela forced her hands steady as she hung the new curtains, each small domestic act a declaration. This was home, and she would not let it be torn apart as evening drew in. The thunder rolled across the valley like distant drums of war. Steela watched shadows dance on the walls and prayed silently for strength. Her gaze met Donald's across the room, seeing in his eyes the same fierce protectiveness she felt, whatever storm was gathering. They would weather it together, Don brought no. Relief from the tension that had settled over Boone Ranch like a heavy blanket. Donald stood at his workbench, the rhythmic scrape of whetstone against metal filling the cool morning air. One by one, he sharpened his tools. Axe, hunting knife, even the old scythe that hadn't seen use since hay season. His movements were deliberate, each stroke measured and precise. Hank leaned in the barn doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Hands are all staying close, like you asked. Posted Jake and Tom on ridge watch. Donald tested the axe edge with his thumb. Much obliged, Hank. Keep them ready, but don't spook the cattle. We work as normal. Ain't nothing normal about this day. Hank spat into the dust. Those deputies come back. They'll bring trouble. That's why we prepare. Donald set the axe aside and reached for his rifle. The familiar weight of it settled in his hands as he began cleaning it, though the weapon was already spotless. Lord willing, we won't need steel. But if they mean to steal children, they'll find more than they bargained for. Through the barn door, he could see Steela moving between cabin and cookhouse, her apron full of vegetables from the kitchen garden. She'd been up since before sunrise, cooking enough to feed an army, beans simmering in iron pots, cornbread baking. In the Dutch oven, dried apples stewing with cinnamon. The twins followed her like shadows, unusually quiet. Miss Steele is taking it hard, Hank observed. Saw her stuffing coins in them kids' pockets earlier. Planning for the worst, I reckon. Donald's hand stilled on the rifle. The thought of Steele preparing her children for flight twisted something in his chest. No mother should have to live in such fear, he said quietly. Not on my land. The morning wore on, sun climbing higher in a pristine blue sky that seemed to mock their worried preparations. Donald checked and double-checked everything. Gates, barn doors, water supplies. He positioned wagons to create barriers if needed, all while maintaining a calm facade for the children's sake. By afternoon, the twins' anxiety had grown visible despite their mother's efforts to keep them occupied. Their small faces pinched with worry as they watched the adults' careful movements, sensing the underlying current of fear. Uncle Doan? The little girl tugged at his sleeve as he crossed the yard. Are the bad men coming back? Donald knelt down, meeting her frightened eyes. Come here, both of you. He gathered the twins close, their small bodies trembling slightly. Let's go inside. I want to share something with you. In the cabin, he reached for Steela's worn Bible, its leather cover soft with use. The twins settled on either side of him in the rocking chair, while Steela paused in her work to listen. My mama used to read this to me when I was scared, Donald said, his deep voice gentle as he opened to Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The familiar words filled the cabin, speaking of divine protection and deliverance from fear. The twins leaned closer as he read, their tension slowly easing. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand. But if shall not come nigh thee. Steela moved quietly behind them, her hand coming to rest on Donald's shoulder. He could feel her fingers trembling slightly, but her voice was steady as she joined in the final verses. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. The words hung in the air like a promise. Donald closed the Bible gently, looking down at the children. The Lord watches over his little ones, he said, and so do I. As evening approached, they gathered around the table, Donald, Steela, the twins, and Hank joining them at Donald's insistence. Steam rose from bowls of beans, and the cornbread was golden and fragrant. They tried to maintain normalcy, passing food and talking of small things. These beans are right tasty, Miss Steela, Hank said, reaching for seconds. Best I had since my own mama's cooking. The twins giggled at his exaggerated enjoyment, and for a moment, the shadow lifted. Donald watched Steela coax them to eat, noting how naturally she moved in his home now, how empty the place had been before their arrival. After supper, Hank returned to the bunkhouse to organize the night watch. The twins, worn out from the day's anxiety, soon dozed off on their pallets near the fireplace. Donald and Steela sat in the gathering darkness, watching the flames dance. I've hidden money in their clothes, Steela said softly, breaking the silence. If something happens. Her voice caught. Nothing will happen, Donald said firmly. But you were right to prepare. A mother protects however she can. You've risked everything for us. Steela's eyes glistened in the firelight. Your peace. Your reputation, maybe even your freedom. Why would you do so much for strangers? Donald was quiet for a long moment, watching the sleeping children. When Sarah died, my wife, this place lost its heart. Became just land and cattle, work without meaning. He met Steela's gaze. A man with no family has nothing worth keeping. Understanding dawned in her eyes as she looked at him. This giant of a man who had opened not just his home, but his heart to her little ones, who saw them not as burdens but as gifts, a chance to rebuild what grief had stolen. They love you already, she whispered. The way they light up when you come home, how they run to show you every little thing, and I love them. The words came simply, naturally. Won't let anyone take them from us. Steela caught her breath at that us, but before she could respond, a coyote's howl pierced the night. The twins stirred but didn't wake. Soothed by Donald's presence and their mother's watchful care, they sat together in comfortable silence, the fire burning low. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Normal sounds of a peaceful night, yet every unusual noise made them tense. Wondering if this would be the moment their preparations would be tested, Donald added another log to the fire, its light catching the silver cross at Steela's throat, the only ornament she owned. Faith and family, he thought. Some things were worth any fight. The sun crept over the eastern ridge, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. Donald stood on his front porch, watching the road through the morning mist. He hadn't slept, keeping vigil with his rifle across his knees. Inside the cabin, he could hear Steela moving about, her soft voice soothing the twins as they dressed. The sound of approaching horses broke the dawn stillness. Donald's grip tightened on his rifle as Wilkes appeared, leading a group of mounted men. The banker's agent sat straight-backed on his horse, a triumphant gleam in his cold eyes. Behind him rode 6 deputies, their badges glinting in the early light. Steela, Donald called quietly through the door. Take the children to the back room. But it was too late. The twins had already seen the riders through the window. They'd pressed against their mother's skirts, eyes wide with fear. Donald positioned himself between the cabin door and the approaching men, his broad shoulders set like stone. Wilkes dismounted first, unfolding a paper with exaggerated ceremony. I have here a writ from Judge Harrison ordering the immediate seizure of the Mayfield children as payment for outstanding debts. His voice carried across the yard, sharp with satisfaction. Stand aside, Boone. The law is the law. That paper's worth less than horse manure, Donald growled. Based on lies and bought with bribes. 2 deputies flanked Wilkes, hands on their pistols. The others spread out, surrounding the cabin. Donald heard Steela's sharp intake of breath behind him. Take them, Wilkes ordered. The deputies rushed forward. Donald swung his rifle like a club, catching the first man in the chest and sending him sprawling. His fist connected with another's jaw, dropping him to the dirt. But there were too many. As he grappled with 2 deputies, a third circled behind and brought his pistol butt down hard on Donald's head. Stars exploded in his vision. He stumbled, fighting to stay conscious as rough hands seized his arms. Through blurred eyes, he saw deputies pushing past him into the cabin. Steela's scream tore through the morning air. No, please, my babies. The twins' terrified cries joined, their mothers as the deputies dragged them out. The little boy kicked and struggled while his sister sobbed, reaching desperately for Steela, who tried to hold on to them. Mama, Uncle Don. Their voices pierced Donald's heart like knives. Blood running down his face, Donald surged against the men holding him. He managed to break free for a moment, landing solid blows that sent deputies reeling. But another crack across his skull brought him to his knees. Someone wrapped chains around his wrists, binding them tight. Stop fighting, Wilkes sneered, or we'll add resisting arrest to your charges. They hauled Donald to his feet. The world swam before his eyes, but he could still see Steela being roughly shoved aside as the deputies carried her screaming children to a waiting wagon. You won't get away with this. Donald spat blood from his split lip. God sees what you're doing. God helps those who help themselves, Wilkes replied smoothly, and the bank helps itself to what it's owed. They forced Donald onto his horse, hands chained to the saddle horn. The twins were already in the wagon, huddled together and cry. As the group started toward town, Donald looked back to see Steela standing alone in the yard, her face white with anguish. The ride into town was a parade of shame and triumph. Townsfolk emerged from their shops and homes to watch the spectacle. The mighty Donald Boone in chains, the crying children, Wilkes riding tall with his victory. Some people turned away, unable to watch. Others whispered behind their hands, spreading the story like wildfire. Serves him right, meddling in bank. Business. Those poor little ones. What did he expect taking in that widow? At the jailhouse, they roughly pushed Donald inside. His head throbbed as they shoved him into a cell, the iron door clanging shut with terrible finality. In the adjoining cell, the deputies locked the twins, whose sobs had quieted to hiccuping. Whimpers. Your mother will come, Donald told them softly once the deputies had gone. Be brave now. He reached through the bars separating their cells. The children scrambled over, clutching his large hands in their small ones. Despite his splitting head and the blood drying on his face, Donald forced his voice to stay steady. Remember what we read in the Bible about God's protection? He squeezed their trembling fingers. Don't be afraid. He hasn't forgotten us. I want Mama, the little girl whispered. I know, sweetheart. She be here soon as she can. The day crawled by in miserable hours. The sheriff brought water and hard biscuits, but the twins barely touched them. Donald's head wound had stopped bleeding, but every movement sent daggers of pain through his skull. Still, he kept talking to the children, telling them stories, singing the hymns Stila had taught them, anything to keep their spirits up. As evening approached, they heard running footsteps outside. Stila's voice carried through the window, pleading, with the sheriff, please, just let me see them. They're my children. Orders from the judge, the sheriff replied gruffly. No visitors until the hearing tomorrow. Donald's heart clenched at the despair in Stila's voice. The twins pressed against the bars, calling out to their mother, Mama, we're here. I'm here. My darlings, Stila's voice broke. I'm right outside. I won't leave you. Through the small window, Donald could see her sink to her knees in the darkening street. Her hands clasped in prayer, voice lifting clear and strong despite her tears. Dear Lord, protect my little ones. Keep them safe through this night. Guard Donald, who has been their defender. Let justice prevail against those who would harm the innocent. Donald bowed his head, adding his silent prayers to hers. The twins huddled close to the bars between their cells, holding tight to his hands as their mother's prayers filled the gathering darkness. Outside, townspeople passed by, some hurrying past the painful scene, others pausing to listen with troubled faces. Our Father, who art in heaven, Stila's voice carried on, steady and clear. A beacon of faith in the darkness of their despair, the night deepened. Stars appeared in the patch of sky visible through the window. Still Stila prayed, her voice growing hoarse but never faltering. The twins finally dozed off, exhausted from crying, their small hands still wrapped around Donald's fingers through the bars. He stayed awake, listening to Stila's prayers, drawing strength from her unwavering faith even in this darkest hour. His body ached, his head throbbed, but his spirit remained unbroken. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they endured together, the woman kneeling in the street, the man in chains, and the sleeping children between them, all held in the arms of prayer. Dawn's first light found Stila still on her knees outside the jail, her prayer shawl damp with dew. As the morning bells rang from the church tower, something shifted in her heart. A clarity she hadn't felt since Donald's arrest washed over her. She rose slowly, muscles stiff from the night's vigil, and brushed the dust from her skirts. Church doors stood open for morning prayers. Stila marched up the wooden steps, her footfalls echoing in the quiet sanctuary. Preacher Matthews looked up from his Bible, startled by her determined entrance. Preacher, she said, her voice carrying. Through the empty church, I need you to read something before the town. He hesitated, fidgeting with his collar. Sister Mayfield, perhaps this isn't the time. It's exactly the time. Stila pulled 2 documents from her shawl, her husband's worn Bible and a creased copy of the Homestead Act. The town needs 2. Hear the truth, both God's law and man's. As she spoke, early risers began filtering into the church. Word spread quickly through the streets, and soon the pews filled with curious townsfolk. Wilkes arrived, standing at the back with a scowl. Preacher Matthews, Stila called out, loud enough for all to hear, read what the Homestead Act says about widows' rights. Then read what Scripture commands about protecting the fatherless. The preacher's hands trembled as he took the papers. He cleared his throat and began to read. His voice grew stronger as the words rang out, clear, legal. Language protecting homesteaders' families from debt collectors, followed by verses defending widows and orphans from oppression. "This is nonsense," Wilkes interrupted. "The bank's contract cannot override federal law," Steele cut in. Her voice shook but didn't break. "My children are not property. They cannot be sold into bondage for a debt they never owed." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Several farmers nodded, their faces darkening as they realized the implications of Wilkes's scheme. Preacher Matthews stood straighter, clutching his Bible. "Mr. Wilkes, this contract you've presented is both unlawful and an offense against God's." "Clear commands. I cannot stay silent while children are torn from their mother." Steele didn't wait to hear more. She gathered her shawl and rushed from the church, hope spurring her feet toward the jail. Perhaps now, with truth exposed before God and neighbors, justice would finally prevail. Word of Steele's stand at the church spread through town like wildfire. Townsfolk rushed from their shops and homes, gathering at the jailhouse steps. There, voices buzzed with anticipation as Preacher Matthews strode purposefully toward the building. His Bible and the Homestead Act papers clutched firmly in his hands. Inside the dim jail, Donald pressed against the iron bars, watching as the preacher confronted Judge Wilson. The twins huddled close in their cell, eyes wide with hope. "Your Honor," Preacher Matthews declared, "this contract violates both federal law and God's commands." He spread the documents across the judge's desk, pointing to specific passages. "These children cannot be held for their father's alleged debts. The law is clear." Wilkes lunged forward, his face red with fury. "The bank has rights not to steal children," the preacher cut in firmly, "not to break up families." Judge Wilson studied the papers, his expression growing troubled. The crowd pressed closer to the windows, straining to hear. Finally he looked up, shoulders sagging. "Release them," he ordered quietly. "The contract is void." The deputy's keys jangled as he unlocked the cells. The shackles fell from Donald's wrists with a heavy clank. He stumbled forward, gathering the twins in his arms as they broke into relieved sobs. Their tears soaked his shirt as he held them close. Steele pushed through the crowd, her face shining. Donald reached for her with one arm, pulling her into their embrace. The watching townspeople witnessed their reunion with mixed emotions, some cheering openly, others looking away in shame at their own silence. Wilkes stormed from the jail, mounting his horse. "This isn't over," he snarled, but his threats rang hollow now. He spurred his horse hard, riding away in humiliation as the dust settled behind him. Donald turned to face the crowd, still holding Steele close. "It wasn't my money or influence. That saved us," he announced clearly. "It was this woman's courage to stand up for truth." He lifted Steele's hand high, and several onlookers clapped Dot as dusk painted the sky in deep purples. Donald helped Steele and the twins into his wagon. A lantern swung gently from the sideboard, casting a warm glow as they started the journey home. The twins nestled between them on the seat, safe at last. Behind them, the town's lights faded as they rolled toward the ranch, their family finally, whole and free. The wagon wheels crunched on gravel as Donald guided the team into Boone Ranch. Lanterns flickered across the yard, and whoops of joy erupted from the gathered ranch hands. Hank stood on the porch, grinning broadly as the family climbed down from the wagon. "Welcome home." The men crowded around, patting Donald's shoulder and tipping their hats to Steele. The twins bounced with excitement, their earlier fears forgotten in the warm welcome. "We got supper waiting," Hank announced proudly, gesturing toward the main house. The savory aroma of beef stew drifted through the evening air. Inside, the long wooden table groaned under bowls of steaming stew and fresh-baked cornbread. The twins scrambled onto the bench, their eyes wide at the feast. Ranch hands filled the seats, passing bread and sharing relieved smiles. The room hummed with conversation and laughter. "Tell us again how Mama stood up in church," one of the twins demanded between bites, and the men leaned in to hear the tale retold. After supper, Donald walked with Steele and the children to their cabin. The structure stood solid against the darkening sky, a testament to the promise he'd Made that first day at the train station. Lamplight spilled through the windows, turning the fresh-cut pine walls to gold. Inside, Steela's hands trembled as she lit the hearth. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything you've done. Donald shook his head, his eyes soft in the firelight. "No, Steela, you get me home." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Their gazes met and held, speaking volumes in the silence. The twins curled up on the rug before the fire, their excitement finally giving way to exhaustion. Donald knelt beside them, carefully tucking warm blankets around their small forms. Their peaceful breathing filled the quiet cabin. He stood at the door, looking back at the scene before him, Steela arranging pillows beneath the children's heads, the firelight dancing across their faces. Outside, stars blazed in the velvet sky, countless points of light blessing the ranch below. The night air carried the gentle sounds of cattle lowing in the distance, horses shuffling in the barn, and the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. Peace settled over the land like a familiar blanket. Everything finally right in their world. Hot morning sunlight streamed through the pines, painting the ranch in golden hues. Outside the new cabin, Donald stood with a young cottonwood sapling in. His hands, its tender leaves rustling in the breeze. Hank and the ranch hands gathered around, tools ready to help with the planting. "This here tree," Donald explained, his deep voice gentle as he addressed the twins, "will grow strong through every season just like our family." He knelt, showing them how the roots spread wide. Each year, it'll reach higher, giving shade and shelter. Steela joined them, kneeling in the fresh-turned earth. Her fingers worked the soil alongside her children's smaller hands as they nestled the tree into its new home. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her smile shone brighter than the morning sun. The crunch of wagon wheels announced the preachers. Arrival! He stepped down, Bible in hand, and walked to where the family worked. The ranch hands removed their hats as he raised his hands in blessing. "Lord," the preacher began, his voice carrying across the yard, "bless this home and those who dwell within. May love, justice, and faith take root here, growing deep and strong like this young tree. Let this place be a sanctuary of hope for all who seek shelter beneath its branches." The twins, their hands still dirty from planting, chased each other around the slender trunk, their laughter echoing across the ranch yard. Steela leaned against Donald's strong arm, watching their play with contentment etched across her face. Around them, the ranch bustled with morning activity. Horses nickered, cattle lowed in the distance, and ranch hands called greetings as they went about their work. Donald lifted his weathered hat toward the bright Colorado sky, his lips moving in silent prayer. "Thank you," he whispered, gratitude filling his heart for this second chance at family, for the gift of love restored to his home. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.